All right. We're live. We'll count up a little bit. Give Cecil something to edit here. Hello, IDP faithful. And good to see you always on a Wednesday night. And we will get ready. And it goes a little something like this. Hit it. What's going to happen with the Cincinnati defense? That and more this week on the IDP Roundtable. John, you're watching it happen in slow motion. Trade deadline's coming up, and that's something in the background as we hear about everything over the next 2 weeks. Obviously, Cincinnati is in a rebuilding mode, and it looks like at least signs from the outside that there could be some big changes coming on defense.
Well, we haven't really heard anything from the organization that will suggest that they're planning on changing anything, but we're starting to hear a lot of rumblings from the players of discontent in the locker room. We here locally, we're starting to hear it. Carlos Dunlop got on social media a couple nights ago after the game and was complaining about playing time. He's been under 50% of the snaps for the last 2 games. He's not happy about that. He's complaining, along with, according to him, some of the other players he was talking about were some of the younger guys that are obviously some of their better players that aren't getting the amount of playing time the way that they should, and they're trying to move too many guys in and out and do too much on defense. They should be simplifying the defense so they can play better and concentrate on making plays rather than what they're supposed to be and who they're supposed to be covering and all those good things that you hear from just about every defense that struggles. It's not just coming from inside the locker room. The locals around here, the Cincinnati people, are starting to get a little nervous and jerky about the way the team has been playing and the fact that they're not really showing much improvement defensively that anybody can really see. And we get Geno Atkins back 2 weeks ago. He played 17 snaps in his first game back. This past week, he played 18 snaps in his second game back, when you would think that he would start getting some more opportunity and get on the field more. But that seems to be the biggest complaint that's coming from just about everybody inside or outside of the organization, is that you're not putting your best players on the field all the time. You're not getting Logan Wilson, who's been obviously your best linebacker. He's not playing all the time, although he is slowly beginning to creep up on the snap count. He had a few more snaps again this week. But it's just a general feeling of discontent in the second year, this deep into it. People are starting to expect to see some improvement, and they just haven't really seen it. The offense has been playing good. At least they've been scoring points, but they're still getting their quarterback beat up pretty good, and there's still a lot of issues there. But with the trade deadline coming up, I would not be at all surprised to see them start unloading the Carlos Dunlops on the team, and maybe the Josh Bynes or some of those guys that maybe don't have as much of a future or as big of a piece of the pie going forward, or that they don't foresee being their starters going into next year. So we could see that start to happen. Again, we really haven't heard anything from the organization that suggests that, but there are a lot of people that wouldn't be unhappy to see it.
I think a general sense of discontent would be a great title for the post-Boomer Esiason Bengals.
Well, there was that moment, and then Kimo Van Olhoffen, but he Olhoffened. You're right. And Matt, I want you to feel free. Matt Schauf, everyone, Sechaufds. Feel free to chime in on the Cincinnati discontent, the winter of our discontent, but also on the rookie update front. Logan Wilson was a player we were excited about. Maybe this could eventually open the door, but also Willie Gay, we talked about last week. Got to see the Bills on Monday night. Didn't get to see much of Willie Gay. What did we see in the Kansas City defense?
Yeah, so hitting the Bengals first, the Cincinnati Enquirer said that Carlos Dunlap and Geno Atkins were told that starting Xavier Williams over Atkins and Amani Bledsoe over Dunlap were better for the team going forward. I mean, I guess we'll see. Xavier Williams has been in the league for 5 years or so now. He's bounced around a little bit, so I fail to see how that's going to be an upgrade over Geno Atkins, unless Geno Atkins is just done physically or they're about to trade him, as John alluded to. Amani Bledsoe's an undrafted free agent, so we've seen some of those guys play, but it's unlikely to me that he's an upgrade over Carlos Dunlap right now. Again, we'll see if there's more plans here, but for now, what it means for IDP owners is Geno Atkins is worthless and Carlos Dunlap is probably worthless. So we're probably not using those guys going forward. We'll see where the defense goes. I think the good news for us, I don't really care if the Bengals enjoy life from here on, as long as they give us fantasy numbers, So I think the good news is all this upheaval only gives them more reason to play the rookie linebackers more, because Jermaine Pratt hasn't been working out. Josh Bynes is a veteran who's just there to teach people. So those guys are not long-term answers. They don't look like long-term answers. Logan Wilson and maybe Akeem Davis Gaither look like long-term answers. So I think there's a better chance now that we get more Logan Wilson snaps. As John said, he played a little bit more this past week, 52% of the snaps there. That's not quite a usable level for most fantasy leagues, but it's a sign of improvement that his playing time is at least growing. Maybe he can soon be the top snap getter among Bengals linebackers. No Bengals linebacker reached 60% this past week, so he's not far from leading the position in that category. We could see that happen soon. I would love to stash him if I can in deeper IDP leagues. Akeem Davis Gaither, by the way, dropped back down to 41%. He had been the lead linebacker in playing time for the Bengals the week before, so we'll see where he goes, but we can't do anything with that at 41% right now. And it's against the Colts with all those tight ends and short passing running backs that you have to cover. You would think that Akeem Davis Gaither would be out there plenty. Was not the case, so we can't use him right now. Willie Gay Jr., I think everybody was excited to see him play some snaps over the previous 2 weeks. Then they take the Bills on. He barely played at all. Daniel Sorensen, the safety, played every snap against them for the first time this season. So I think this one might be a case more of Kansas City playing the opponent. We talked about how the Bills have gone from being one of the league's most run-heavy teams to being one of the most pass-heavy. And I think that the Chiefs just loaded up against that, and especially with Buffalo trailing for most of that game. I guess it just made more sense for them to have Daniel Sorensen on the field. Sorensen's been putting up decent numbers in somewhat limited playing time, short of full playing time. So it's nice to see him get some more snaps, and he's on the radar for deeper IDP leagues. And then just kind of rounding out the rookies, Kayvon Chason had opportunity over the past 2 weeks with Josh Allen out for 2 games. He did absolutely nothing with it. He played over 70% of the snaps in each of those 2 games, had 2 hurries in each of those games, but that's it. I mean, basically nothing else. And it was against Houston and Detroit, so it wasn't like he faced teams that are impossible to sack. Kayvon Chason's a guy that I was not excited about heading into this season. I still doubt his IDP upside long-term. At the very least for redraft, he is a non-entity right now.
The Jags defense, a non-entity right now, going against the Chargers this week. Some entities getting back on the field, John. Let's start with the Washington linebackers. We've been trying to solve this or see if there is a solution that can help us. Another change in week 6 is pointing towards someone that might actually hold some value in Washington.
Well, maybe. I mean, we can finally start talking about Pierre.
Yeah.
Cole Holcomb looks like he got back on the field this week. And what was really surprising about this, his first game of the season, and he was out there for 65% of the snaps. And normally when we see guys coming back from an injury where they've missed several games like that, they kind of ease them back in. I mean, that might be an ease back in, but if that's a sign that they're easing him back in, then he's likely to play 80 or 90% of the snaps going forward. We still saw Bostic play all the snaps, but we know that the coaching staff likes Holcomb. They liked him last year. They were a little bit bummed when he was out beginning of this year. I think that hurt the defense as a whole, and I think that's why Pierre Lewis maybe slid into that starting spot early on. I could definitely see Holcomb getting a bigger role. I don't know that he'll get 100% of the snaps or thereabouts, but I could definitely see him getting 85% of the snaps going forward.
Let's talk Cardinals. As by the way, Brian Sumner says, how much fun was it to watch Buddha on Monday? I mean, just playing with a broken thumb or coming back from a broken thumb too. It was an exhibition for him, and we didn't get to see Matt Chandler Jones. He's out for the year, but we did see some hope in that pass rush core. Maybe not from the guy we brought up last week, but someone we've been waiting for an impact from a long time.
Yeah, imagine how ugly that game would have been for Dallas if Chandler Jones had been in it. I mean, the guys that were playing were getting after Andy Dalton at will, and they were down their top pass rusher. We talked to Kylie Fitz last week. He was injured, didn't play in the game at all. So Devin Kennard and Hassan Reddick were the top 2 edge guys, and they both delivered in this game. Kennard came back from an injury, multi-week injury. I forget whether it was 2 or 3 games, but played a season high and position leading 69% of the snaps in that game against Dallas, who right now looks like a positive matchup for pass rushers, which is the opposite of what we expected maybe coming into this season. Dallas very banged up front, so I think pass rushers get an upside matchup with these Cowboys going forward. Kennard didn't have any sacks in this game against the Cowboys, but he does have 2 sacks and 5 QB hits over his past 3 games. So he's been producing overall as an edge rusher with the Cardinals this year. And this week they get Seattle. Seattle allows some pressure, not huge on the sack side, but there is opportunity for Devin Kennard to get after Russell Wilson there, especially with Seattle leaning more pass than they have in the past. And Hassan Reddick, we talked about him a little bit last week, but he got a season-high 61% snap share in this game. That's a slight bump from where he was before, but the total snaps were way up from where he was in previous games. And, of course, this was a blowout by the end of the game. So we'll see whether he's just going to be around that 60% playing time level or whether he's going to play more snaps per game once they're actually in a closer game. Either way, Hassan Reddick has had 2 QB hits in each of his past 2 games, had 2 sacks against the Cowboys. He's showing that upside. Maybe he's finally ready to deliver on the promise that made him a first-round pick way back when, and now that Arizona has really kind of settled on what position he's right to play.
And we'll watch him against Russell Wilson this week. Great Seattle. And Arizona, watching Budda Baker fly around the field is fun. Watching Devin Bush fly around the field was fun, John Norton, but we're not going to see him again this year. What about Robert? I'm going to give him a nickname if they haven't already. Robert the Hammer Spillane. And if you don't know Mickey Spillane, look it up. What do we have here in the new starting inside linebacker for the Steelers?
Well, I think the important thing to keep in mind here is that Coach Tomlin called him the primary guy at the inside linebacker position going forward. And that's probably all we need to say about that at this point. There was initially my first reaction was, well, maybe we'll see Vince Williams get a little more playing time with this, but we know they don't like him in an every down role. I really, to be honest with you, had never heard of Robert Spillane before this. But, watching the game and everything, I thought he held up pretty well being forced into service like that. So maybe there's something there for the long run. Maybe they've got something in him that we just I don't really still don't really know a heck of a lot about him. I haven't had a chance to do much research other than the fact that he's going to be in a golden situation, probably be playing full-time or very nearly full-time. On a solid defense that tends to funnel a lot of plays to their inside linebackers. So I think he's definitely somebody we want to look at getting on our roster going forward, especially if you are suffering from some of the injuries that have been hitting the linebacker position in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I can say from following the Steelers closely, of course, that Ulysses Gilbert, a 2019 draft pick, seemed like he would be the next guy up. But Spillane held up very well. Didn't look overwhelmed or hesitant, and energy-wise, intensity fit right in with the Steelers defense. Another team, Matt, that's had some changes at inside linebacker this year has been the Green Bay Packers. What's the latest on who we might be able to harvest some value from there?
Yeah, we thought it might be Ty Summers after he had a good game, but I think it was Chris Barnes' shoulder injury that was keeping him out of the mix. Last week against the Buccaneers, Chris Barnes had the green dot on the back of his helmet, which of course means he's calling the plays and more likely to stay on the field. And he did play more than Ty Summers in that game against the Bucs. Racked up 10 tackles, been very productive on the tackle front, has Barnes on low playing time all season. I mean, he's been like a 30% playing time guy. It climbed a little bit after Christian Kirksey went down, but Barnes has been giving us way more tackles than most guys will in that 30% playing time range. The thing, though, is that neither Chris Barnes nor Ty Summers is playing particularly well. So I don't know if it's a safe position to say, okay, Chris Barnes is the guy that's going to play more snaps going forward and we can count on him for tackles. I think from what we've seen, we should assume that it's Chris Barnes that we should start ahead of Ty Summers, but we should also assume that as soon as Christian Kirksey's ready, he's going to get back to full playing time because they're really not in great shape at inside linebacker without him. Kirksey hit IR heading into week 4, so he's got at least one more game for his shoulder injury. And of course, because he's a defensive player, we get garbage updates from the reporters about it, and we have to go searching. We have to guess when he's finally actually ready to come back. But, if you can stash Christian Kirksey and wait, that's the way to go because I think ultimately he's going to be the only guy worth playing in Green Bay.
we'll see if Leighton Vander Esch is worth playing. What did we observe, John, in his first week back? The Cowboys, the rare piece of good news for them on the injury front this year. Is it good news in IDP leagues?
Yeah, I think it's definitely good news that Vander Esch is back. He didn't have a significant. Well, he had about 50% workload in his first game back. There was a little concern at one point when he went off to the side and he was kind of grimacing a little bit, and they were looking at his shoulder. But I think that was more a fact they were trying to get him more comfortable with the extra padding that they had around the collarbone, as he wound up going back in the game and was fine after that. Numbers didn't really flow in there too well this week, but I think we'll see that change going forward. They've got a few other guys that are coming back, so I think we might see this defense step up a little bit as we go down the stretch and play a lot better than what they have, hopefully. I want to jump in a little bit on the Green Bay situation. The one thing that they signed James Burgess this week off of Atlanta's taxi squad, and because they signed him off of a taxi squad, that means he has to go on the active roster. So that was kind of a head scratcher to me, and it got me to thinking that maybe Kirksey's injury is going to be a little bit longer than what they expected, and they might be looking for somebody else that could be an option for them there. Because I do agree with Matt that neither Barnes nor Summers played particularly well. So maybe we'll see something out of him before the season's over. We know what he's capable of if he gets on the field. So he's one of those guys that's in the background that nobody thinks about, but I always like to see where he's at, because there is some potential there if he gets a chance to play.
And of course, with the COVID guidelines, we have to watch to see if he's even going to be eligible to play this week, because a lot of times they have to go through like a 5-day period at this point before joining a new team.
Got to get tested 6 days in a row and stand on his head for a week.
Yes, and we'll see even, for instance, on the Le'Veon Bell situation, Andy Reid isn't committing to him playing this weekend, so it's moving slow. But a game that, at least on the scoreboard, probably should not move slowly is that Green Bay Houston game. And I want to talk about Tyrell Adams, Matt. And I should have known, before we did the show last week in the leagues that John and I are in together, he added Adams everywhere, and I ended up with, I don't even know what, a bag of peanuts. Adams in the lineup last week was a fantastic hit for IDP leagues. However, there's something there to watch, Matt, as far as his future usage. And also, this is a good example of how playing IDP makes you better at traditional offensive fantasy football, because you know the matchups to exploit. How is Tyrell Adams a matchup to exploit?
Yeah, so Tyrell Adams put up the numbers each of the past 2 weeks. He looks like somebody that you want to start with Bernard Jerick McKinney out of that lineup. And I would still go ahead and use Tyrell Adams this week against Green Bay, even though Green Bay has not been a terrific matchup for linebacker scoring. But the concern that we have to watch with Tyrell Adams is that he's playing poorly in coverage. Specifically last week against Tennessee, he gave up the long touchdown catch to Anthony Ferkser in coverage. He gave up 6 catches for 90 yards and a touchdown total on 9 targets into his coverage against the Titans, according to Pro Football Focus. That followed the week before, where he also allowed a touchdown in coverage to the Jaguars on 5 targets. So Tyrell Adams, if he keeps playing like that, he could see fewer and fewer snaps. Robert Tonyan for Green Bay is up next. So I know, we don't want to talk too much about offense on this show, but Robert Tonyan has a good matchup here. So anybody who's listening and also plays offensive players because your league makes you, Robert Tonyan's in a good spot here. But again, Tyrell Adams, I'm starting him this week, but I'm watching to see what happens, to see if he just plays his way out of this starting job.
Matt, when Gene used to be on this show, to make him a little fussy, every now and then I'd ask him a team defense question. So we especially don't bring up team defense on the IDP show. We do bring up players to potentially add on the waiver wire. And John, you don't usually add players when they're on a bye, but it's not easy to find consistent pass rushers. When Emmanuel Ogbah was drafted very high by Cleveland, they expected him to do that. He didn't, and they were pretty happy to move on from him. He moved on from Kansas City after having a decent year. Now with Miami, he's on fire. You heard the big piece of Miami news, of course, the quarterback change. But what about Ogbah? Is there some lasting value here if he's on your waiver wire?
Yeah, the jury's kind of still out, but we always say that 1 is a fluke and 2 is a trend, and he's put together a string of 4 or 5 pretty solid games. So I think this might be a case of a guy that was drafted to Cleveland as a number 2 second-round pick. Spent 3 years there, had decent numbers, was a contributor, but never really blossomed there. 1 year with Kansas City, made a contribution, 5 sacks or so there. Now he's played 5 games now for the Dolphins, and he has 5 sacks, 9 tackles, 9 assists, a forced fumble, on his way to by far the best game or best season of his career. It just looks like a situation where it's a guy that just was kind of a round peg in a square hole with some of these other defenses that maybe has found his home, found the place that he fits. We see players often go the other way too, where they have a big season, so they sign a free agent contract and go someplace where they don't fit, and they kind of flounder there and never come back to what they were paid to do. But I think Ogbah might be one of the steals of free agency by the end of the year. They got a pretty good deal getting him in there, and he's doing a great job for them, putting a lot of pressure on. Had 2 sacks this last game. If you don't pick him up this week when he's on a bye, he's not going to be there for you when you come out of the bye week. So in a lot of our leagues that we play in together, he's already gone. So check your waivers and see if he's out there, and stash him for a week, and then get him in your lineup next week.
In Miami, good organization now, to make those smart signings. If you don't re-sign him, get a nice compensatory pick. You might be, Matt, checking your waiver wire for Avery Williamson. Going back a year plus, he was going to be the guy along with Mosley, and Mosley, of course, opted out. Williamson didn't come back very quickly from his ACL. It seems like he's back now. He could spend a lot of time on the field. Should he spend time on your roster or even in your lineup?
Yeah, I mean, definitely Avery Williamson is getting back to being a full-time player now. Full playing time each of the past 2 games. He also hit full playing time back in week 3. Had a down game in terms of participation in between against Denver, 44% playing time there. But otherwise, over 90% in those other 3 games among the past 4. He's had 8+ tackles, 5+ solos in each of those full games that he has played. So when he's on the field for full playing time, Avery Williamson is putting up the tackle numbers. It's a negative linebacker scoring matchup against the Bills this week, so don't be shocked if the numbers are down there. But Avery Williamson looks like a weekly starter going forward. And we just talked about the Miami defensive line. Zach Seiler is somebody that we're going to have to start paying attention to at least see what happens coming out of the bye, because he has entered the D-line picture over the past couple weeks. Looks like maybe tied to a playing time dip for Devon Godshaw, but Seiler is a 288, 290-pound guy who can play defensive tackle, can play out on the edge, especially in their system. He ran a 4.840 in pre-draft testing. His player profiler athletic comp is Nick Fairley, which is a nice athletic comp if you're a defensive lineman. I mean, Nick Fairley had some injury stuff that kept him from reaching his ceiling, but that's the kind of guy that you want to be compared with athletically if you're a big guy in the NFL.
And a man after my own heart, he lives in an RV, Seiler. I always wanted to live in an RV. Maybe I'll get a chance one of these days. Let's change the conversation here to another player coming back from injury, John. Kiko Alonso, who's just like the Energizer Bunny as far as having some sort of relevance. But is his relevance here his own fantasy value, or are we concerned more about what Alonso will do to other Saints linebackers' value?
Well, maybe a little bit of both there. Alonso hit PUP this year, start the season, missed the first 6 games. He's coming back from that knee injury. We've seen him battle knee injuries throughout his career. It seems like he's always coming back from a knee injury. But when he's healthy, he's a very good inside linebacker. He can play the weak side. He's got some versatility. I have not been impressed with what I've seen from Alex Anzalone so far. So I think Alonso was activated from the PUP this week. He will start practicing. I think they have a little bit of time before they have to decide whether they're going to put him on the active roster or not. But I think that's coming in very short order. And I wouldn't be at all surprised to see him get a few snaps in this week even. Anzalone has played just about every snap over the last several games, and he's not getting it done. He's not making plays on the field. He's not putting numbers in the box scores. It seems like he's always a step late to the party. And I think they're looking possibly for an upgrade there. And if there's anybody on their team that can provide that upgrade, it would be Alonso. And the ripple effect with that could have some impact on Demario Davis's numbers going forward. I think there's plenty of opportunity there for 2 linebackers to put up good numbers, so I'm not overly concerned with that. But if you're in a league that it's real very competitive and you got to beat your competition to the punch and getting guys like this on your roster, this might be the week to go ahead and scoop up Alonso and stash him until he's healthy enough to get on the field.
But John, Anzalone is so pretty. I mean, how do they get guy with that long blonde hair out of the lineup?
Yeah, golden locks that everybody loves so much. You don't have a hard time finding him on the field. If there's a pile up, you know if he's in it.
Still not as good as Clay Matthews' hair. No one will ever beat Troy Polamalu in the hair game. Another injured player coming back. Matt, Brian Sumner asks, or brings up that Melvin Ingram will be back. We'll see. Maybe not necessarily this weekend against Jacksonville. Certainly back soon. Designated to return from IR. Is this another one, like John said, in competitive leagues? Should you go ahead and just pick up Ingram and when he comes back this week, next week, whenever, because he's worth it?
Absolutely, because Sagan, one of the leagues that we play in, I saw him dropped a while back in their IR slots, and I grabbed him right then and put him in that IR slot to wait until he was back. As you mentioned, he was designated to return from IR this week, so he has not been fully activated yet. We don't know whether he's going to play this weekend against Jacksonville. I certainly hope that he does, because that'll be a nice matchup to return to. But we'll have to watch to make sure he gets back to the active roster. But I say use this opportunity now to make sure that Melvin Ingram is owned. Get him on a roster. After this, they get the Broncos. They get the Raiders, which is not the greatest sack matchup, but the Dolphins after that, the Jets after that. Melvin Ingram is a top 15 IDP lineman most of the time when he's healthy. So we want to go ahead and assume that he'll be all right. We'll see about the knee. I mean, it didn't seem like it was a new injury that landed him on IR. Kind of unclear exactly what the situation was. It came up during the practice week, and then he landed on IR with it. So I don't know whether it was a flare-up of an existing issue or if it was a practice injury that was just underreported. We'll see. But the fact that he was designated to return at the beginning of this week, I think says good things about how close he is to being ready to go. He should be back to full playing time soon. And again, there's some upside spots coming up, and he's just a good player when he's active.
I want to see the Chargers make a run. I just want to see Justin Herbert in the playoffs. 7th seed on the road in the first week of the playoffs. Hopefully you'll be making the playoffs in your IDP league. Cowboy Blazer fan joined us from Periscope and said, what kind of defensive linemen do we think are going to ball this weekend? We're not just going to give you that. We're going to give you all the gurus, starts and sits for week 7.
One thing about Ingram that over the past several years, if you notice at the end of the season, he kind of peters out a little bit. It's like he wears down. He is undersized a little bit for a defensive end. And I think having these games off early in the season like this might actually solve that problem for him. He'll be well rested and fresh when he comes back. So he might be tip-top shape all the way through week 16 for us. Starts and benches this week. Hassan Reddick, we've already talked about a little bit. Seattle's allowing 3 sacks per game, a little over 2 sacks to edge defenders in each game. Reddick maybe not be the best edge rusher in the league, but he's going to be definitely getting plenty of opportunity there as a full-time replacement. I like Trey Flowers this week against Atlanta. The Falcons are kind of middle of the pack in sacks allowed per game, but defensive ends tend to make a lot of tackles against the Falcons. As a position, defensive ends are averaging about 10.3 tackles per game, combined tackles and a sack. Run defense is Flowers' bread and butter. That's his strengths of his game. So even if he doesn't get to the quarterback, I think he's going to give us usable tackle numbers this week. I like Zadarius Smith against Houston. Texans are allowing 3.2 sacks per game, including 2.2 sacks per game to edge defenders. Smith coming off of a bye, rested up, should have a good game in this one. Kyler Fackrell and maybe even Marcus Golden against the Eagles. The injuries keep coming for the Giants. They lost Tay Crowder this week, who they put in front of Marcus Golden. Pretty soon they're going to have no choice but to play Marcus Golden. The Eagles are allowing a ton of sacks every week, a lot of pressure. So those guys would both be good starters. I like Brandon Graham this week against the Giants. Giants are allowing 2.5 sacks per game. And good tackle totals to edge defenders as well. Brandon Graham has been red hot. He's on pace for 13 sacks this season, 40 tackles and 40 solo tackles and 13 sacks. He's never had either in any single season in his career. Danny Trevathan, a couple of weeks ago, he was a guy that I was giving up on. I actually cut him in a couple of leagues, and of course, he immediately came out the next week and started putting up better numbers. Snap count is still down a little bit from last year when he was playing full time, but he's getting 75, 80% of the snaps. Really good numbers the last 2 games, and has a solid matchup with the Rams. I like Corey Littleton this week against Tampa Bay. They seem to be leaning on Ronald Jones a lot, 3 straight 100-yard games, a lot of rushing opportunities there, makes a lot of tackle opportunities for the linebackers, and Littleton tends to cover the tight ends a lot, so if they try to get Gronkowski going, that could be a few extra opportunities for him. Like Jayon Brown and Rashaan Evans against the Steelers running game. Just no matter what the Steelers have going on, whether their quarterback's healthy or not, they just seem like they're always solid matchups for inside linebackers. Both of these guys have been putting up decent numbers, but I think we see a little bit better production from them this week than what we have in recent games. I like Von Bell and Jesse Bates this week against Cleveland. They accounted for 18 combined tackles and assists last week, in week 2 when these 2 teams met. Cleveland's running game is the Bengals defense. We saw the first matchup. They're not any match for the Browns running game. So we're going to have a lot of opportunity for the guys at the 3rd level to make plays. I like Mike Hilton if he's healthy enough this week. He's a little banged up. Joe Hayden, Steve Nelson, basically anybody in the secondary against Tennessee. Over the Titans' last 3 games, we've seen 8 quarters put up at least 5 solo tackles. I'd probably sneak Terrell Edmonds in there as well just for the matchup with the running game. I like Troy Hill this week against Chicago. He was a little gimpy in week 5. His snap count was down a little bit. He was back to full health last week. Numbers came back up, not to what we'd seen over the first 3 games or so, but I like the matchup this week with Nick Foles under center. The Bears are a much different passing game, and I think the corners are going to have a lot more opportunity. At the corner position as well, Jeff Okudah versus Atlanta. Okudah has 16 tackles, 3 assists, and an interception over the past 3 games, and the Falcons are a plus matchup for corners on most weeks. The Cincinnati matchup for corners that we mention every week. This week, my target is Terrence Mitchell. Had 11 tackles a couple weeks ago, then kind of had a bye week after I picked him up and started him, and then I cut him, and he came back and had another nice game this past week. So I think the Bengals will pick on him. That'll be their target for this week. And Mike Davis versus Jacksonville. Gardner Minshew's been throwing the ball all over the yard. I think the Jags are likely to be behind relatively early in this game, so there should be a lot of passing. Davis has been pretty hot lately as well. Some guys I'm going to get out of my lineup, Josie Jewell and Alexander Johnson against the Chiefs. With the exception of this last week when Andy Reid set a record for rushing attempts for any of his teams over his career. That was a nasty rainy game, and that was kind of the game script, how that went. We're not going to see that on a regular basis. No linebacker the previous 3 games recorded more than 4 solo tackles against the Chiefs. Olivier Vernon was a guy I talked about last week against the Bengals, and it's kind of strange to think that I'm going to tell you not to play somebody against the Bengals, a pass rusher especially. But over the last 3 games, the Bengals have only allowed 2 sacks to edge defenders. They're allowing sacks to everybody else on the field. But if you're a defensive end or an outside linebacker, they're making sure that you don't get to the quarterback. Myles Garrett's not somebody that you can bench against anybody, but the Bengals have been pretty solid at keeping the edge guys off their quarterback for the last few games. And the last one would be Brian Burns against New Orleans. The Saints just don't give up a lot of sacks. For as long as I can remember, since Drew Brees is there, they have averaged well under 2 sacks a game allowed. And Burns just has a bad matchup this week. I think you've got a lot better options out there.
You don't have a better option for IDP information than Matt Schauf. Schauf DS Draft Sharks. Check out all the other good stuff he does over there. And John Norton leading the IDP team, the guru. Get all of his work and many other great IDP writers, analysts. It's part of your footballguys.com subscription, but get this show for free every week because, well, we just like spending time with y'all, and we like to hook up the IDP community because it's only real fantasy football. Y'all are the best. You're always so